Hola traders, yo soy Juliana Rangel y estoy muy feliz de estar aquí porque tengo una oportunidad muy valiosa y muy importante para mí y para ustedes también. Hoy tengo el privilegio de entrevistar a Oliver Velez. Vamos a hacerle unas preguntas no solamente de su parte profesional como trader, sino también de su parte personal. Espero que esto aporte muchísimo para la comunidad hispana y todas esas personas que quieren empezar en este mundo del trading y los que ya están en este mundo del trading. Así que es un privilegio y es un sueño para mí hecho realidad tener aquí a Oliver Velez haciéndole esta entrevista. Gracias, Oliver, por permitirme este espacio, por permitirme hacer esta entrevista. La verdad es un sueño para mí hecho realidad y es un honor estar compartiendo contigo estos momentos. Y sé que para la comunidad hispana va a ser de mucho valor esta entrevista. Vamos a aprender muchas cosas de Oliver y además vamos a conocer otra faceta de Oliver Velez.
Well,
Gracias.
Liliana, thank you very much. The honor is actually mine to be here. I'm very glad we're going to have an opportunity to sit down and get some questions and answers for our fellow traders and those individuals who are actually thinking about trading. So I consider it not only an honor, but an opportunity to serve some good in the trading community.
Excelente. So, ¿empezamos?
Empezamos.
¿Estás dispuesto a responder todo tipo de preguntas?
No, absolutely. I'm absolutely open for any questions you can answer. Now, that doesn't mean I'm going to answer every single question, but let's take them one by one.
Ok, está bien. Empecemos. ¿Quién es Oliver Velez?
Everyone seems to start with that question. I have been a professional trader for the past 30 years. December 2016 marked my 30th year as a professional trader. My interest in trading started when I was about 16 years old, and the desire to be a successful trader grew in an intense way every single year. I had the good fortune of being able to start my professional trading career relatively young in age. I was 24 years old when I started my professional career as a trader. It took me about 5 years to really gain my footing in the trading space. But about 6 or 7 years into my professional trading career, the opportunity to train professional traders, my craft opened up a brand new world for me. And so when you ask who is Oliver today, Oliver Velez is just not a trader. In fact, I consider the other components of Oliver Velez even more important than my trading career, and that is the training and mentor aspect of Oliver Velez. I today am one of the most sought after mentors and trainers of traders in the world. I am one of the most sought after speakers on the topic of trading the markets for a living, trading the markets professionally. I have been a crusader who has helped to usher in this new era in the markets, this new era that is now being almost dominated by the individual. And so today I'm also a dreamer. It is my goal to really spread the message of trading all over the world, because I think this is an opportunity that every single individual should at least give a try. It is the last bastion of total independence as far as I'm concerned. And so I'm just an evangelist. In short, I'm an evangelist for trading.
Gracias. ¿Y qué significa para ti ser trader?
Interesting question. Trading is freedom. In a word, trading is freedom. Trading is an activity, an individual activity and pursuit that is designed to obviously make an individual money. But more importantly, it's an activity that demands that the individual be true. Trading is an activity that demands that the individual be disciplined and do what they say they're going to do. It's a skill that's very unique, and one of the things that I've always found very fascinating about trading is that the same things that call for being a successful trader are the same qualities and characteristics that are called for being a successful anything, a successful man or woman, a successful human being, a successful father, a successful employer or employee, or what have you. Trading is spiritual as far as I'm concerned, because before there's any hope of any degree of success in trading, one has to master a certain portion of oneself. And any activity that requires you to look at yourself and to find your frailties and your shortcomings and shore those shortcomings up, any activity that causes you inner reflection and demands that you be exact and true and disciplined, in my opinion, is a spiritual pursuit. So for me, trading is a lot more than what a lot of people generally think about it. They think that it's an activity that calls for buying something for $1, selling it for $2, and profiting. But I look way beyond that. It's spiritual in nature.
Excelente, excelente. Para mí, libertad es igual a Oliver Velez. Pero me gustaría saber qué significa libertad para ti.
What is freedom to me? Freedom is never having to say no when you really want to say yes. Now let me delve into that just a little bit. When I was 6 years old, no, I think I was 8 years old, I had an assignment by my teacher, which was to go home over the weekend and to come back with what I believed was the definition of success. And I began thinking about this over the weekend. I looked at my parents, and my parents didn't seem to fit my 8-year-old definition of success. And I started regarding all of my family members and anybody I knew. And something hit me during that weekend. I remember when my mother, during one Christmas, could not actually get me the gift that I wanted. I wanted this special skateboard, and so I got a skateboard, but it wasn't the skateboard that I wanted. And the skateboard that I wanted was very professional, and it was just a little bit too expensive for my mother to have. And I remember looking into her eyes on Christmas Day when I opened up my present, and I saw the deep disappointment in her face when she saw that I realized it wasn't the skateboard that I wanted. And so my mother, I knew that moment, wanted to say yes to the gift that I wanted, but she couldn't. And so during that weekend when I was 8 years old, I thought about that, and I came back in class on Monday and I gave my definition. My definition of success, Mrs. Nardiello, that was my teacher's name, was never having to say no when you really want to say yes. My mother said no to the skateboard that she really wanted to say yes to. That's what freedom is for me. It's not necessarily connected to anything economically, although economics can help the depth of freedom. But freedom is the ability to do what you want to do when you want to do it on your own terms, as long as those activities don't infringe on the rights of others. And that's what freedom is to me.
Wow. Me hiciste recordar también mi infancia, que muchas veces tuve esos momentos, y por eso es uno de mis propósitos estar haciendo trading también. Cuando eras niño, ¿qué soñabas ser de grande?
Oh, well, when I was a really young child, I believe I had all of the natural wishes and desires of most kids. I remember wanting to be a cowboy at one point, and then wanting to be a police officer and a fireman. And Then I graduated to wanting to be a superhero. I remember. And I went through a variety of superheroes. I wanted to be the Silver Surfer. That was one of my favorite Marvel superheroes. When I was about 7 or 8 years old, my desires took a major shift, and I remember this like it was yesterday. I actually began to have my first real grown-up desire, I would say, and I wanted to be a writer. And I began reading Edgar Allan Poe, which gripped me so words can't express. I was deeply moved by his work. And I voraciously read everything Edgar Allan Poe, and then that led to reading other things like the writings of Ralph Waldo Emerson and the writings of Plato and the speeches of Socrates. And this reading made me appreciate the writing aspect of it, how some of the deepest thoughts and concepts known to man can be communicated by the written word. So my first real adult desire was to be a writer. And that lasted for years. When I was about 14, that desire began to shift into desire number 2, the second grown-up desire, which was to be a speaker, because my school took our class on this special trip, and it was to see an individual by the name of Zig Ziglar deliver a speech. And I will tell you, Juliana, that Zig Ziglar spoke for about 90 minutes. And as a 14-year-old teenager, I sat on the edge of my seat, captivated. This man motivated every fiber of my being, and it was so impressive and had such a deep impact on me that I said, that's what I want to do. I want to motivate people like that. I want to move people like that. And so my desire of being this amazing writer moved into being this amazing speaker. And that lasted a few years until I discovered the stock market. Wow. When I discovered the stock market, it sort of put the desire for being a writer and the desire to be a great speaker on hold. And trading, the idea that you could sit down and earn a living and do something without employees, without having a boss, without a major investment, without a building, without an office, without all of the things that normally are required to start a business. This idea captivated me in a very deep way, and it put my life on hold. And what's really fascinating about the question you answered is that today I look back and realize that all 3 of my desires have come together and serve what I do today. Today I communicate to my traders via the written word, via the 5 books that I've written and that are translated in 5 different languages. The speaking at events and to my traders all over the world, almost every single day. And of course, the trading for the past 30 years. So my message is, be careful what you wish for when you're a child, because you might just get every single one of them.
Así es. Así es, o sea que lo fuiste primero, ya eres escritor de muchos libros que nos encantan, que todos los hemos leído y que para todo trader decimos el libro Day Trading es la Biblia del trading, y eres un orador, un speaker.
That's right.
So, los sueños se hacen realidad. Todo lo que puedo decir que todo lo que te propusiste en la vida lo has logrado. O puedes decir que todo lo que te has propuesto en la vida lo has logrado.
Yes, in a very weird way. When I look back over my life, virtually every single desire, every single wish as a child or as an adolescent or even as a young adult that I've had has actually come to life, has actually come into existence. So I'm always telling young people, be careful what you put your thoughts into, what you put your energy into, and what you wish and desire, because a lot of times you get exactly that. Do you hear me? You get what you wish for the vast majority of the time. Boom.
Oliver, ¿qué hacía antes de ser trader?
What did I want to do before being a trader? Well, I wanted to actually become a trader as early as my 16th year. So I didn't really have an opportunity to want a lot before being a trader. But I will say this, the dream of my parents was for me to be a concert pianist. I played the piano from 3 years old onward. It was a major part of my life. My parents invested a huge amount of time, money, and effort into my future piano career. And I was quite talented at it. I traveled throughout the United States playing as a little child prodigy. And a lot of people don't know that small fact about me. So there were moments when I felt as a child that this was my life, that it dominated most of my waking hours. I practiced 6 to 8 hours a day. I went to a special school that focused on talented musical kids, and I earned money as a child playing for venues, the piano. So when I look back on my life, my younger years, that's all I knew and that's all I thought about, was basically playing the piano. So that lasted until I discovered girls. And 15 years old or so, the piano sort of just went to the wayside because practicing 8 hours a day just didn't quite balance out to spending time with my little friends and my little girlfriends in high school, so much to the chagrin of my parents. Secondarily, I was indoctrinated to believe that you needed a college profession. You needed a profession that was stemmed by time and study in the university and college. So because I was so fascinated with the market and business, I felt like, okay, if I have to go to school, if I have to get a college degree, then I'm going to get it in something that's associated with my love for the markets. And so I decided that accounting was the best topic to study because it was the language of business. It was the art of picking a company apart and learning about all of its parts and how it worked and the money flow of the company and how it made its net profitability. And so I studied accounting in college. And yes, there were moments when I said, well, maybe I'm going to be an accountant. But every time I had these other desires, trading always loomed larger than all of those brief desires that I've had. But piano and accounting are the first two.
Entonces, ¿tú estudiaste contabilidad?
I did. I went to college for 4 years for accounting.
Ah, no sabía eso, parte de Oliver Velez. Y eso era lo que iba a preguntar, ¿qué habías estudiado o cómo te has entrenado, cuál era tu profesión, qué seminarios o cursos habías hecho, qué libros habías hecho para ser trader?
Yeah, well, yes, I did. I studied accounting for 4 years. I actually did not finish. So my parents were so upset that I started my trading career in the last year of my university. An opportunity presented itself, and I never finished my accounting degree, and I was almost there. And to this very day, my mother asks, so, son, when are you going to finish your accounting degree? It's so funny. But I never actually finished. I got right to the finish line, and an opportunity presented itself, and I think I had like 2/3 of one final year to go, and I never really went back to complete that. Maybe one day, just to please mom.
Solo por complacer a tu mamá.
See. But did I study anything that helped me become a trader? Absolutely not. I don't think that you can really study to be a trader. I think it's one of those activities where you just learn on the job. You have to just do it. No reading in the world, no study in the world can really make you better. Those things, while somewhat helpful, reading and studying can help, but they help from a preparatory point of view. They never help with the actual activity of trading. They help you prepare for the activity of trading, which is different. So just like if you were a professional boxer, there are certain things that help you prepare. You know, you might warm up and do some jumping jacks, and you might skip rope or what have you, and you might practice on the bag a little bit before the fight. But that's not fighting. That's not boxing. That's activities that prepare you for the boxing match. And so I get this question all the time. What did you read? What did you study? I didn't study anything. I read books about the market, but I will say this. Nothing I read about the market truly helped me become a good trader. Nothing I studied really helped me become a good trader. What did help was reading on psychology, especially as it relates to the financial markets. That had a more profound impact on me as a trader than anything. Learning and reading about the history of bubbles in the market, when bull markets stopped and then crashes began, reading about those specific times and what was the mindset of the people during market crashes or right before market crashes. I like the works of Mark Douglas. Mark Douglas, to me, is a must-read for anyone who wants to trade properly. He deals with the psychological aspect of trading. The technique is 10, maybe 15% of it. The rest is all psychology. So if there is something to prepare, if there is something to prepare the trader to be better, in my opinion, it's all psychology. You learn trading by trading, and especially trading under the guidance of someone who has already arrived. That's incredibly important, because you can go out there and do all the stupid trading you want, which will have no benefit. Your trading actions, which is the stuff your learning is made from, your trading actions must be right actions. So that requires someone overlooking your activity and ensuring that you are gaining the right experience, which will build the future trader that you want to be.
Muy interesante, muy interesante. Entonces, tú empezaste fue leyendo sobre psicología y sobre el mercado, como todo el tema de las burbujas y de la crisis financiera y todo eso. ¿Por qué empezaste a leer eso? ¿Qué fue lo que te motivó, te impulsó a leer sobre eso?
My father was a taxi cab driver who owned his own taxi service. And he had this special client that he would take to Wall Street and bring back home every single day. This individual who worked on Wall Street was what they call a gold bug. He was obsessed with the accumulation of gold. He believed that gold was the only thing that had real, true, intrinsic value. And he encouraged my father to take $35 out of his pay each week and buy 1 ounce of gold. He said, do this for the rest of your life. And I guess that took because my dad took his word seriously. And every week my dad would buy gold, 1 ounce of gold. And at that time, gold, the price of gold was fixed at $35 an ounce. Well, to make a long story short, when the government ordained fix on the price of gold was lifted, gold, which was artificially held back for many, many years, decades in fact, skyrocketed. And it topped $800 an ounce. As you can imagine, the years and years and years of my father accumulating gold, this huge bubble at the time in gold had an enormous impact on my family's life. It changed our lives forever. My family moved from Brooklyn to a suburb in New Jersey. My schools went from being public to private. The things we went from renting to home ownership, and I was too young to understand why there was such a dramatic change in the quality of our lives. When I became older, I began to realize that it was the market. Like, oh my God, my life changed because my dad did something in the market, and that fascinated me. So I began to look into this, that it was interesting to me that one simple act that my dad did could change an entire family's life this way. And so that drew me to studying about the markets, investigating the market, and that investigation about not just the gold market then expanded to the overall market. And then I realized there are individuals who make their living this way. And that realization is the bug that bit me. I realized at that moment, that's what I want to do. I don't want to do it casually like my dad did it, because I remember my dad trying to find the next score in the market, which he could never do. So I wanted to make it my profession. I wanted to always do it. I wanted to be informed. I wanted to be intelligent with it. I didn't want it to be lucky like it was with my dad. I wanted it to be real, and I wanted it to be every single day. That's what led me to being a trader.
Ah, qué buena historia, no sabía esa parte de la historia de tu vida. Entonces, por una decisión de tu papá, que cambió la vida de toda la familia, tú decidiste estudiar qué era lo que había hecho tu papá.
Sí.
Y eso te llevó al mundo a los mercados financieros, pero tú no querías ser, por suerte, sino estudiarlo. ¿Y cuántos años tenías cuando te diste cuenta de que toda tu vida había cambiado por una inversión que había hecho tu papá en oro? ¿Cuántos años tenías tú?
When my father began accumulating gold, it was shortly after my birth, in 1966, 1967. It wasn't until the latter 1970s, going into the beginning of the 1980s, that gold really exploded to this impressive price of $800 an ounce. So I was about 10 years old. It's began to dawn on me why our lives changed so dramatically when I was about 14, 15 years old. And when I was 16, by the time I was 16, I was totally immersed in the desire to make the market a permanent part of my life in some way. And it was at 16 years old that I truly discovered that there was a way to do this, and that was to become a professional trader. And I learned that a professional trader operates and manipulates the market for personal gain. And it fascinated me to no end. I saw it as an opportunity to do something that the vast majority of people found very difficult. And I found the opportunity to get into something that had the ability to truly create wealth and financial freedom beyond an individual's dream. And I've never stopped being passionate about that.
Entonces, te diste cuenta de eso, empezaste a estudiar, a leer sobre el mercado, psicología, y luego ¿qué hiciste? ¿Invertiste tu propio dinero o te empleaste como corredor de bolsa? ¿Qué hiciste para llegar a ser un trader?
Good question. And unfortunately, Juliana, that's another story I have to tell, okay? So I'm 17 years old, and I want to do nothing else but trade and be a professional trader. But I have no capital whatsoever. So I had this idea. If I don't have capital, I'll have to use the capital of others. And others for me were my family members. So I went to each individual family member, and fortunately I had a fairly large family, not my direct family because I'm an only child, but I had a lot of aunts and uncles and second cousins and things of that nature. And I went to every single family member and with my passion for the markets, explained how the family really had to get involved with the stock market. And that if we did not get involved with the stock market, we would be left behind. We would find ourselves 10, 15 years later, left behind one of the great wealth opportunities of a lifetime. This is what I explained to my family members. So it worked. And so we formed a family investment club. And we decided that the minimum investment was something like $50 a month into the pool, and some people invested more. And my family gave me the ability at 17 years old, the right to make all the decisions for the fund. And we started off very small. And this family investment club moved from an original 14 or 15 individual members to over 800 members at the peak of the club over a number of years, because we began, family members wanted friends and co-workers to get involved when the fund started to do really well. And so we began to accept individuals beyond the family circle. And I'm proud to say that that family investment club is still in existence today. It's called WBA, which stands for Wealth Builders of America. And that family fund has funded for many of my family members home purchases, vacations around the world, retirement. In some cases, the children of the family members, their universities were paid from the fund. So it was a huge, it's one of the most special things I believe I did in my entire professional trading career. And it was my original idea, and I started it when I was 17 years old. But that opportunity gave me the opportunity to be a decision maker in the markets, to actually look for opportunity, to invest in the opportunity, to make decisions as to when the opportunity was over and to close the opportunity, and to manage the positions as they were open and what have you. And it was a wonderful opportunity to gain a foundation of knowledge about trade management and things of that nature. After I went into college for accounting, as I mentioned to you, and I did my studies, but the vast majority of my focus was on managing this family fund, this investment club. And I got an opportunity to work for an individual as an accountant, even though I hadn't finished school as an accountant, but I was far enough along in my studies where the firm took me on as an accounting, but my accounting job was to account for a trader. So the universe was starting to bring me opportunities that was associated with the only thing I had interest in doing, trading. So I stopped school to take on an accounting job, to do the record keeping for this very successful trader. And as you can imagine, the ability to look at every single trade of a successful trader, to have to write it down, to have to journal the trade, to have to document the buy, the sell, and subtract the cost with commissions and come up with the net gain or the net loss. It gave me the opportunity to actually relive every single individual trade of this successful trader. And that activity was also that job was also a very pivotal point in my career, because it served as an additional layer on my foundation that led to me becoming a successful trader. After doing accounting for the trader for a while, this trader understood that my interest in the markets and my family fund and how it was doing, he gave me the opportunity to manage half of the funds that he had under management. And that was my real big opportunity in the professional trading world, that I took on approximately $20 million. He had a total of about $40 million that he was trading with. He assigned $20 million to me just to see how I did. And in the first year, I think I earned something like 38% in the first year on the 40,000. That was extraordinarily impressive. And into the second year, I was on a roll and was on my way to perhaps making as much as 60 or 70% on my portion of the capital that I was trading. And like most traders, most successful traders, my head started to get a little big, and I wanted to be paid more on the gains that I was making. I was making a very, very small amount of money for the gains that I was producing for this trader. And when I approached the trader to make more, because I was making so much money for him, when he said, "No, Oliver, I'm not going to give you more," that was the day I decided that it was time for me to start my own individual professional trading career and to rely on no one else. Okay.
Esa es una historia pues de admirar y del cual sentirse muy orgulloso. Pero muchos de nosotros, los que estamos en este mundo del trading, te hemos escuchado hablar de que tuviste 4 años donde solamente tenías pérdidas y pérdidas y pérdidas. ¿Cuándo fueron esos 4 años? ¿En qué momento de tu vida fueron esos 4 años?
My family was very supportive, because my first 4 years with the family fund was really quite horrendous. And it was almost as if every single action I took turned into a loss. And I believe that had I not had such a supportive family during those years, because all I did was produce losses for the fund and for the family, that I would not be the trader, I would not be who I am today. And it was a wonderful opportunity for me to learn, even though I was losing. And I wasn't even losing my capital, I was losing the capital and money of others, which made it that much more stressful. So my 4 and a half years of almost straight losing was the foundation for my ultimate success, actually, because I learned every possible way not to make money. And it was almost as if, after discovering every thing that you shouldn't do, I was able to arrive at the actions that you should do. And fortunately, I had a supportive family to live through those dark years. It was really reaching the end of that support, though, because into my fourth year, quite honestly, many members did not want to contribute anymore, and many members were really disillusioned and believed that the market wasn't something that they should be involved in. And I felt really bad about that because I knew it was. It was just what I was doing wasn't paying off or wasn't right. But those years, as dark and as troubling as they were, today I would not go back in time and reverse that at all. I believe that a big portion of my success was born from those years. And I'm very philosophical about it, actually, because I believe that almost everything that grows in life first goes down. So we take a seed and we put it down below ground level so that it can grow up above ground level. And if you take a ball and bounce it down first, it will bounce higher than the distance to the floor. In order to leap, you must first squat. I believe that the movement down first for a trader is natural, that a trader should lose first, that it is the way you learn, like a child learns to walk by falling and getting back up, and falling and getting back up. And doctors tell us that if a parent has not allowed a child to fall too often, that they wind up being clumsy as adults. And it's the children that have fallen all over the time that become our great athletes, with great agility physically. So I'm philosophical about it. I get quite frightened when I see a trader experiencing success from the beginning, because I know that's not the natural order of things. The best way I've always said it, and I'll repeat it again, before you leap to the sky, you must first squat. And I had a 4.5 year squat. But when the leap came, it was absolutely astounding. I wouldn't give it up for the world.
Mencionaste o dijiste dos cosas que te quería preguntar. Y una es, si pudieras regresar el tiempo, ¿qué decisión cambiarías de tu pasado? ¿Qué decisión que quisieras como borrar de tu pasado? Y la otra es, ¿cuál fue tu peor momento en el trading?
Great questions, great questions. So if I could go back in time, what would I undo? What would I change? That's a very difficult question for me because it goes against my philosophy that everything that you've experienced was necessary for your current reality. So to be truthful, I wouldn't change a thing. I wake up every single morning, Juliana, and I have to pinch myself just to make sure that this reality that I live every single day is real. I make a point of expressing and showing deep appreciation for all that I've gone through and who and what I've become and the work that I do for thousands of traders all over the world. I could not be more content or more pleased or more happy. I can't imagine that there is a better state than what I experience now. And so with that contentment, when I think about the past, I think about the past being deeply rooted in the cause. So when I think about the past and think about the concept of changing anything in that past, that does not compute for me because the past had everything to do with my current reality, and I could not imagine my current reality being better. So I have to say that I would change absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. There was a second question though. And the second question, I believe, was what was the worst period of my trading career? And that is very easy. It was the September 11th, 2001. It was the terrorist attack on the Twin Towers in New York City. And I went into that morning, that Monday morning, with a fairly large position. I had 38,000 shares of Qualcomm, the symbol is QCOM, QCOM. So I had 38,000 shares, and in pre-market trading, it was up $1 from Friday's close. So I was up $38,000 pre-market. And of course, as we know, the Twin Towers were hit, and the market never opened that Monday morning. In fact, the market didn't open until the following Monday morning. And we know the history, the market opened down in a huge way. And in all of my positions total, I was down about $1.4 million on the following Monday morning. And it was quite devastating for me. I'd never experienced a loss of that magnitude in my entire trading career. And I was faced with a very grave decision, and the decision was, do I just cut my losses and go somewhere and lick my wounds and come back and rebuild, or do I dig in and try to pull myself out of the hole? And that's what I did. I decided that I wasn't going to sell in a panic. And so I let those positions settle. And I began, when I saw that they were starting to settle, I began to go to work on trading around those decisions. And I was trading in a very short-term way. So I began a process of chipping away at the $1.4 million loss. So if I grabbed $10,000 gain, I would take it really fast. A $4,000 gain, I would take it fast. Here's a $6,000 gain, I would take it fast. And so I began just taking small gains, 2,000, 3,000, 6,000, 8,000, 1,500, 4,500. And this style of chipping my way back, this approach grew into a style of trading that became my #1 money-making approach to the markets from that year onward. It is the style and approach that I teach traders today, how to earn a living in a short period of time, trading a short period of time each day off the open for small, quick, but meaningful gains. And so out of this $1.4 million devastating loss grew a style that has produced tens of millions of dollars. In fact, much more than that when you account for the fact that I've taught it to thousands of traders and what it has meant for them and the impact it's had on their trading lives. It's amazing. So that huge loss was like turning lemons into lemonade. And that too, I would not take back for a million years.
Bueno, increíble cómo muchas de las cosas que has dicho me identifico con ellas. Ahorita que decías que no te arrepientes de nada de tu pasado, a mí también cuando me hacen esa pregunta pienso mucho y digo lo mismo, porque todo nos contribuye a ser las personas que somos ahora. Y bueno, ya cuando hablas de la peor historia en tu trading, ahora me gustaría entonces que nos contaras cuál ha sido tu mejor momento en el trading.
I think this is the time where I do this in the interview. What was my best time as a trader? My best period? There have been several. In 1995, I had one of the biggest breakthroughs in my trading career. I remember it like it was yesterday. I went to a level of profitability and consistency that I never thought was possible. And that started in 1995. And it was that jump in my progress that took me to a level that made me believe that I had the ability and the right, and in some ways the obligation to share my gift, my talent with others. Before that, I was a profitable trader and I earned my living from the markets, but I didn't feel that there was a right to share what I did with others. But it is in 1995 I had this major breakthrough and my profitability jumped from an average, I don't know, I was doing an average $15,000 a day maybe, and back in the early 90s that was a lot of money, and it just mushroomed from there. And it was a level of profitability and consistency that I didn't think was possible, but it happened. And so that was a wonderful period because it was the period that took me into this new world of not only trading for great profits and with great consistency, but sharing that gift and training others to do the same. And so it opened up a different chapter for me. But there have been other periods as well. 2007 was another major breakthrough for me, and a new style of trading, which I termed ATM, came into existence. And this short-term oriented style of always having orders in the market and always trading took my level of consistency even at that point to an even higher level. And that turned into a style that I was also able to share. I recently experienced not necessarily a higher level of profitability, because I consider myself somewhat semi-retired now in my trading. My average trading day is 18 minutes a day. And years ago, I used to trade all day long. So while the level of profitability was not necessarily increased, it was a breakthrough in my deep understanding of markets and the human psyche and how to teach traders to get around the psychological barriers that stand in the way of trading. And so, you know, throughout my trading career, I've had these periods that have served as major breakthroughs to higher levels of understanding, higher levels of profitability, and higher levels of consistency. I will say this in closing. I was a trader who not just wanted profitability, I wanted consistency. Consistency was held higher as a more important gift to me than profitability, because there's a way to get profitability without consistency. I did not want profitability without consistency. I wanted the type of gains that came from winning almost every single time and losing only occasionally. There is a way where you win very few times, but you lose small, searching for the big win. Small loss, small loss, small loss, small loss, small loss, boom, big win. And the big win overcomes all of the small losses. That's not consistency, but that is a valid style of trading. I wanted win, 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 occasional loss. And so there are two ways to be profitable. I wanted profitability through the consistency way. And so there were breakthroughs in terms of higher levels of consistency, breakthroughs in terms of higher levels of profitability, and breakthroughs in terms of higher levels of understanding and being deeply connected with what it takes to overcome some of the psychological barriers that stand in the way of trading.
Qué momento tan especial, de verdad que me siento anonada de estar viviendo esto, me siento muy feliz de estar teniendo este tiempo con Oliver Velez y de poderlo compartir con ustedes. Esta es la primera parte de la entrevista. Se me ocurre que podemos hacer 2, 3, 4 partes de entrevista y ya aquí supimos muchas partes de la historia de Oliver, como su profesión y cómo empezó en el trading, y en la siguiente parte podemos hacer como ya más preguntas de su vida personal. Se me ocurre que podemos hacer eso. Y en la tercera parte algo más interesante como preguntas de ustedes que le quieran hacer a Oliver. Bueno, ahí vamos viendo qué más podemos aprovechar de Oliver Velez.